couple of quick questions. And I'll just sort of put this out there. You both have faced significant challenges in your businesses. But if you could talk about what sort of the biggest challenges coming up. Obviously, people are now accepting these as professional industries. They're growing, especially the cannabis, but all these other industries that you've been first to invest in, Catherine. So what's the real biggest challenge that you see coming up for you not being the only one out there investing in it?
I would love it if other people started, to be clear. It would legitimize the category, and I don't think our position as a market leader would move. But when I think of what would challenging, I think of definitely advertising. So with alcohol, for example, 70% of your audience has to be 21 plus. I think people think. It is advertising, right? So in alcohol specifically, 70% plus of your audience has to be 21 and over. And for TikTok, 34% and below are 19. So as people are jumping to this new social media platform, there's big challenges. But how do you solve for that? You solve for that through press, right? That's why you see every summer Vogue's top 5 favorite canned cocktails, right? Or you see all of these lists with Vice companies on them because that's the creative way to do so. And furthermore, just to give you a concrete example, there's 2 sex brands that are constantly raising money within the industry. One of them sued the MTA and used investor money to sue the MTA to try to make a point. The other company solved this problem by curating products that they would be able to properly advertise on the subway, right? So do you want to invest in somebody who just complains endlessly, or do you want to invest in somebody who's actually creating solutions? And that's definitely something we look for when we invest in Vice Ventures.
And sorry, Catherine, you sort of hinted at it with this understanding of cash flow that everybody sort of in California understands, because if you go to a dispensary, you can pay in Bitcoin but not credit card, and ATM machine you can't have, et cetera, which is just weird and outdated and probably needs a little bit of a departure. And that's why Catherine was telling these stories of bags of cash. What's the next step? How do we evolve the industry?
Well, I think I'm now seeing funds basically coming on board to fund cannabis ventures, which is nice. But I think until it goes federal, the banking, they're not going to support cannabis industry. You know, we can't use cash transactions. We can't use Venmo. We can't use PayPal, again, because we touch the plant. You know, we do need cash apps. You know, we need development.
So there's actually a company called Ledger Green that lets you pay with credit card now at dispensaries across. I've spoken to the company. I've seen it held at Sweet Flower and a lot of big dispensaries in New York, or not New York, LA. I'm always in LA, but I'm a New Yorker. So I think that's really encouraging, right? That we're seeing financial solutions for a company, as she said, at one point had bags of cash in the freezer.
And since Lisa outed me as a DC political nerd, Biden did something interesting over the last few weeks by expunging the criminal records on federal for cannabis and any federal crimes that you have. It's not everything, but it's a move in the right direction. To both of you, what's the sort of next policy thing that needs to happen to actually make it a legitimized industry or industries on the sort of policy side?
Well, I think federalizing, and also, you know, it's a good move what he's just done, I think. But again, it always comes down to education as well. I think still a lot of people, specific to cannabis, you know, the whole just almost like gun control to me, where it's not like a universal regulation or different laws in different states, et cetera, that happens with cannabis as well. So if we had one set of regulations that we could all follow, that's going to be important, and also dosage, labeling, et cetera, track and trace, All that should be universal, so everybody knows what they're biting into. Everybody's had a bad edible experience, right? So, but we need to know, we talked about that. We need to know, like labeling, universal education on, cannabis and et cetera, et cetera.
I think a great example of why we need regulation, federal regulation, is during the vaping crisis, right? There was vitamin E acetate in all of these vapes, and it wasn't illegal for them to do that. They had no responsibility to tell their investors like what the binding agent is for these vapes. And because of that, if you think about it, if the government had just come in and said, you can't use these binding agents, these are safe, we would have saved millions of lives. But the FDA is reactive and not proactive. So I think it's years before we see any type of real movement there whatsoever.
Yep, and it sounds like there also needs, what really struck me on your presentation is that these clauses of being able to invest in all of this just needs to, like the SEC needs to do something in a real way on investment side. But for audience members out here that are interested, can they actually invest in vices, or will their stockbrokers not allow them to invest in vices?
Phenomenal question. So some of my investors, when we make capital calls, if they bank at Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs, they've actually blacklisted us and refused to do business with us, despite us not investing in anything that's dangerous whatsoever. It's just the idea that we're investing in a harm reduction nicotine product that scares them. So I mean, but then at the same hand, like you see some banks that are just turning a blind eye, right? That see full forward, like very, very, like a great example is that there's an underground cannabis delivery service in New York City that does $500 billion a year. They bank with one of the sketchiest banks out there, and the bank doesn't ask them for proof of income, doesn't ask them why it's all these cash deposits all the time, right? So it's like, you really, that's why I think when I think of challenges, I think challenges is bullshit. I think it's all about creative solutions, to me.
Amazing. And is there anything that the new vices can learn from cannabis that's sort of been ahead of the curve, or is it all the same hustle?
I feel like it's the same hustle at this point in time. We do still have our training wheels on. You just reminded me, even with the bank that we use, finding a bank that will take any sort of vice industry income, we can't do a direct cash deposit. We cannot walk into the bank. It has to go through their armored car. It's got to be all detailed out. We can't even walk into the bank to drop off cash, which is incredible to me. So.
Unbelievable. Well, there sounds like there's some real departures, and this is the future on this stage of new ways to invest and new ventures. One last quick question while our time is run out. What's the most interesting next vice that you see that you're excited about?
I'm so excited you asked me that question. This is my favorite topic of conversation. So right now in the nicotine industry, we have the ability to shape the future of harm reduction products. What does that mean? That means we can replace cigarettes and disposable vapes for harm reduction, non-combustible vapes, right? And if you can change that and get rid of byproduct and get rid of that disposable plastic, we have won, once again, as a society. And the FDA basically made this rule on August 8th, 2016, which said that if your recreational nicotine product was on the market before that date, you are deemed legal to sell it in the United States until you have FDA approval. So every oral nicotine company that exists right now are the only oral nicotine companies that exist. So we as investors have a huge responsibility to fund harm reduction vice products, harm reduction nicotine products in particular, right? Because right now, Philip Morris, BAT, Altria, they have tons of cash on hand, and they're looking for harm reduction right now. If you know anybody working on a harm reduction product, please email me at poptech@viceventures.com.
Amazing. And so with that, it sounds like you guys will be back in D.C. as you're now picking fights with Department of Treasury, Securities Exchange Commission, Food and Drug Administration. This is the future. This is touching all of our lives and super fascinating. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.